Views of your interview with Tucker Carlson. There are many different positive reviews. But it is clear what comments are coming from Western leaders. For example, the Prime Minister of Great Britain and the Chancellor of Germany. I will quote them. They called your attempt to explain the reason for the start of the special operation and justify it with the threat of a NATO attack on Russia ridiculous and absurd. What do you think about such assessments? First of all, it's good that they watch and listen to what I say. If today, for some reason related to them, we are unable to conduct a direct dialogue, then we should be grateful to Mr. Carlson for the fact that we can do this through him as an intermediary. So the fact that they are watching and listening is good. But the fact that they distort what I said is bad. And they distort the card. Why? Because I didn't say anything like that. I did not say that the start of our special military operation in Ukraine is connected with the threat of a NATO attack on Russia. Where is this in my interview? There is a recording. Let them show where exactly I said this. I was talking about something else. I said that they constantly deceived us from the point of view of not expanding NATO to the east. By the way, first of all, this was said through the mouth of the then Secretary General of NATO. And he was a representative of the Federal Republic of Germany. It was he who said, not an inch to the east. Then there were 5 expansions and a complete deception, of course. We were and are concerned about the possibility of Ukraine being drawn into NATO, since this threatens our security. That's what I said. But the immediate trigger was the complete refusal of today's Ukrainian authorities to implement the Minsk agreements and the ongoing attacks with numerous casualties on the republics of Donbas, which we have not recognized for 8 years, on the Lugansk People's Republic and on the Donetsk People's Republic. They ultimately turned to us with a request for recognition. Seeing the futility of resolving issues within the framework of the Minsk agreements, we recognized them. Then we concluded a well-known treaty of friendship and mutual assistance with them. And in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, we fulfilled our obligations under this treaty. As I said, we did not start the war, but we are only trying to stop it. At the first stage, we tried to do this through peaceful means, through the Minsk agreements. As it turned out later, they led us by the nose here too. Because both the former Chancellor of Germany and the former President of France admitted, they directly and publicly stated, that they did not intend to fulfill these agreements of ours. But they were simply gaining time in order to pump up the Ukrainian regime with additional weapons. This is what they successfully did. The only thing we can regret is that we did not begin our active actions earlier, believing that we were dealing with decent people. They criticized Carlson immediately, and before the interview, and after the interview. Now they blame him for the fact that few tough questions were asked, that he was too soft with you, and you were very comfortable with him. And, do you think, have you crushed the American journalist with your authority? I think that you're Carlson. When I say that he is yours, I mean that he is a representative of your journalistic workshop. He is a dangerous person, and that's why, because, frankly, I thought that he would just behave aggressively and that he would ask these so-called tough questions. Not only was I ready for this, but I wanted it, because it would give me the opportunity to respond sharply as well, in my opinion. This would give a certain specificity to our entire conversation. But he chose a different tactic. He tried to interrupt me several times, but, surprisingly, for a Western journalist he turned out to be patient. He listened to my long dialogues, especially those related to history. And he didn't give me a reason to do what I was ready for. Therefore, frankly speaking, I did not fully enjoy this interview. But he strictly followed his plan. And he fulfilled his plan. But how meaningful it was in the end is not for me to judge. Viewers, listeners, or perhaps readers of the received material must draw their own conclusion. As a result of this interview, calls immediately began to be made to impose sanctions against Tucker Carlson, and in general, there was talk that they could arrest him. Is this actually possible? Assange was arrested, and almost no one remembers him anymore. Only people close to him talk about it. That's all. These are the features of public consciousness. As soon as the topic goes away, that's all over. But, really, they at least accused Assange of giving away some state secrets. It's hard to pin this on Carlson, because he didn't touch any secrets at all. Nevertheless, perhaps, theoretically, everything is possible in today's America, in today's United States. From the point of view of Carlson himself, this would be sad. I don't envy him. But this is his choice. He knew what he was getting into. But from the point of view of making people all over the world understand what a modern liberal democratic, in quotes, dictatorship is, which is supposedly represented in today's ruling class of the United States, it would probably be a good idea. Then they would show their true colors. Just to dispel all the doubts that have arisen, I have this question. Carlson said that after the interview you had a follow-up conversation. Now everyone is wondering what? Well, he went through his plan, as I said. And as I understand, that's all. He did not go beyond this plan. There were some other topics, for example, that I thought were important to talk about. But I did not press further on topics that the journalist did not raise in the conversation with me. Therefore, the issue of demonization of Russia, connected, say, with the same interethnic events, with the Jewish pogroms in the Russian Empire, of course, they should have arisen during such an official part. But one of the topics that we talked about when the cameras were turned off is exactly what the Secretary of State of the United States spoke about. Mr. Blinken spoke about this several times. He said that his relatives, that his great-grandfather fled Russia from Jewish pogroms. And in different countries of the world, in Europe, in the United States, this topic constantly arises. I repeat, this topic arises with the goal of demonizing Russia in order to show what kind of barbarians live here, what kind of scoundrels and robbers live here. But in fact, if you look at what today's Secretary of State said, and if you look not at political slogans, but at the essence of the problems that occurred, then much becomes clear here. We have it all in our archives. For example, Mr. Blinken's great-grandfather actually left the Russian Empire, in my opinion. He was born somewhere in the Poltava province. And then he lived and left Kiev. The question arises, does Mr. Blinken believe that Kiev and the surrounding territories are originally Russian territory? This is the first. Second, if he says that his great-grandfather fled from Russia from Jewish pogroms, then at a minimum, I want to emphasize this, he believes that there was no Ukraine in 1904. It was in 1904 that Mr. Blinken's great-great-grandfather left Kiev for the United States. This means there was no Ukraine there if he says that his great-grandfather fled from Russia. Apparently, Mr. Blinken is our man. It's just in vain that he makes such public statements. This can lead to failure. The other day, the German media published articles that the grandfather of the current German foreign minister, the grandfather of Annalena Baerbock, was an ardent Nazi. And considering everything that has been happening in relations between our countries in recent years, it turns out, perhaps, that at some genetic level such a virus of National Socialism is being transmitted in this country. This is also one of the subtypes of extreme nationalism. By the way, what just occurred to me about these pogroms is that they mainly took place in the Russian Empire in the south and southwest, precisely on the territory of today's Ukraine. This was in Kiev, as I said, in 1905. If Mr. Blinken's ancestor left in 1904, but the first mass pogrom in Kiev was in 1905. So his great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather could only have known about it either from the newspapers or from information that came from Kiev at that time. But in principle, such massive negative events arose at the beginning of the 19th century, in my opinion. In 1820. In 1821 there was the first such mass pogrom. Of course, these crimes took place in Odessa, then in Melitopol, in Zhytomyr, in other cities of today's Ukraine. And it also happened in Belarus. There were a couple of events of this kind in Siberia. But the first pogrom was associated with the murder of the Greek patriarch in Constantinople. And then the Greeks who lived there believed that the Jews were somehow involved in the assassination attempt on the patriarch, but that's not what's important. And the important thing, by the way, is that these pogroms were opposed by resistance squads, which consisted of Jewish and Russian youth. And the government gave appropriate assessments, even the Tsarist government. And it tried to prevent these tragic events, including with the help of the army. But, I repeat once again, this is a separate topic. And as for nationalism and Nazism, fascism, you know, I'll tell you something. That may be strange. First of all, this lady herself. What is her name? Annalena Baerbock. Yes, Baerbock. I ask so that I wouldn't get her last name wrong. She represents the Green Party. Many representatives of this part of the European political spectrum are preying on people's fears. And they are fueling people's fears about what may happen in the world due to climate change. And then, capitalizing on these fears, those who incite them pursue their own political line, which is far from what they came to power with. This is happening now in Germany. For example, coal generation there has increased. It was greater than in Russia. In the structure of their energy sector, it was greater. And now it has become even bigger. Well, where is this green agenda? This is the first thing. Secondly, people like the German foreign minister, of course. In this case it is she. They are hostile to our country, to Russia, but, in my opinion, she is also hostile to her own country. Because it is difficult to imagine that a politician of such rank would treat the economic interests of his country, his people with such disdain. I won't go into details now. But in practice this is exactly what happens, and we see it. And the next part of what I want to say may sound dissonant with what I just said. I do not believe that today's generations of Germans should bear full political responsibility for everything that Nazi Germany did. It is impossible to shift responsibility for what Hitler and his henchmen did, not only in Germany, but also in other parts of the world, Europe, and so on, onto the people of today's generation. I think that would be unfair. And in general, slapping this label on the entire German people is a dishonest position. It is an abuse of what this people experienced. What the peoples of the Soviet Union experienced, it seems to me that this is not fair and it is unnecessary. We must proceed from the realities of today. We need to look at who is actually doing what and who is pursuing what policy in this regard. By the way, in my opinion, it would be useful to do the following thing. In my opinion, in many countries, even in those in which it would seem this should not sound like a political leitmotif, but it does. Unfortunately. What I mean, it sounds like some kind of exclusivity of some peoples over others. Some kind of chosenness, and so on. Well, look. This is exactly how Nazism began. Therefore, if this is so widespread, then we must also think about building this anti-fascist, anti-Nazi propaganda and work at such a global level. I repeat, on a global level. Moreover, this should not be done at any state level. This will be effective only if it is done at the level of public consciousness and public initiative, and it doesn't matter in which country in the world this happens. In the European Union as a whole, a virtual panic began in connection with the possible return of Donald Trump to the post of President of the United States, and Trump's recent statements, just the other day, have generally discouraged European leaders. They don't hide it. Trump said the US should only protect European countries if European countries pay for it. In general, why has such a relationship developed between Europe, European leaders, politicians, and between Donald Trump? They always called Trump a non-systemic politician. He has his own views on how the United States should develop relations with its allies. And it sparked before. Take the withdrawal of the United States from the Kyoto agreements in the field of ecology. Then everything sparked too. But the then President of the United States decided that the United States would withdraw from these agreements, despite the attractiveness of the environmental agenda, because he believed that it was harmful to the American economy. That's all. He made a strong-willed decision, and the job was done. And no matter how the European leaders cursed, he did it. Yes, then he corrected it. In this sense, how is Trump's position different? Nothing in principle. He wanted to force the Europeans to raise their defense spending, or, as he said, then let them pay us for protecting them, for opening the atomic umbrella over their heads, and so on. Well, I don't know, let them figure it out themselves. That's their problem. Well, probably, from his point of view, there is some logic in this. From the Europeans' point of view, there is no logic here. And they would like the United States to continue to carry out, free of charge, some of the functions that have developed since the formation of NATO. It's their business. I believe that NATO is no longer needed at all. There is no sense in it. There is only one meaning. It is an instrument of US foreign policy. But if the United States believes that it does not need this tool, that is its decision. And every day the current US President Biden gives more and more reasons for the whole world to discuss the state of his health. This is the president of one of the largest nuclear powers. At the same time, we all actually observe, to put it mildly, extremely specific footage on a daily basis. When you see and hear all this, what do you think about? I think that the domestic political campaign, the election campaign, is gaining momentum in the United States. It is becoming more and more acute. And, in my opinion, it is inappropriate for us to interfere in this process. Well, listen, when I met with Biden in Switzerland, but that was several years ago, 3 years. And then many were already saying that he was incompetent. I didn't see anything like it. Well, yes, he looked at his piece of paper. To be honest, I also looked at my paper. There is nothing special about this, but the fact that somewhere, while getting out of the helicopter, he hit his head on this helicopter. Well, who among us hasn't hit his head somewhere? Let him throw the first stone at him. Actually, I'm not a doctor. And I believe that I should not give any comments on this matter. That's not what we should be looking at. We have to look at the political position. I believe that the position of the current US administration is extremely harmful and erroneous. And I told President Biden about this at one time. Then the question, that was 4 years ago, and that is now. It turns out that it becomes relevant again. Who is better for us, Biden or Trump? Biden is better for us. He is a more experienced person. He is predictable. He is a politician of the old formation. But we will work with any US leader who the American people have confidence in. I'd like to go back to your interview with Tucker Carlson. We recalled the statements of the current leaders of Germany and Great Britain. But the person about whom you said in an interview with Carlson also spoke out. Where is this Johnson now? It was he. As follows from Arakamia's confessional statements. Who ordered Kiev not to negotiate with Moscow, but to fight. If the Kiev authorities had not listened to these advice then, how could events have developed further? That's what Mr. Arakamia himself said about it. Well, you look in sync. We didn't pull his tongue, he said what he thought. Why did he say this? I don't know. Apparently he is such a frank person. He said that if they had fulfilled those agreements, if they had fully implemented the agreements that arose in Istanbul, then the war would have stopped a year and a half ago. He said so. When Mr. Carlson's interview is on, it seems to me that Mr. Arakamia's interview should be shown simultaneously. Why the West took such a position, I say that it was the West that did it, and, above all, the Anglo-Saxon world. Since the former Prime Minister Mr. Johnson could not come on his own initiative without consultations with Washington on this matter, surely such consultations not only took place, but I think that he simply went on a business trip at the expense of the American administration. They paid him travel allowances for this. There he outlined the position that it was necessary to fight with Russia until the last Ukrainian, of course, this was in parentheses, but to fight to the bitter end and inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Apparently, they were counting on such a result, but, as I told Mr. Carlson, I can repeat this to you, if they see that they are not getting results, then apparently they need to make adjustments. But this is already a question of the art of politics. Because politics, as we know, is the art of compromise.